Thank you very much, Michael. And thank you for being here after the lunch. I'm given 20 minutes. I'll try to stick to that, if this thing works. Okay, that's excellent. Okay, so I'm from the UITP, the International Association of Public Transport. I won't bother you with too many slides of what we are, well, I think some of you might know UITP. It's the international association gathering all the main public transport operators, government bodies, and as well as supplying industry worldwide. I mean, we used to be very European-centric, but that's a story of 10, 15 years ago. Today, more than half of our membership and our activities are actually outside Europe. So, amongst which, quite a few here in Singapore. Now, Michael suggested to me that I would speak about the trends in our public transport sector, the trends that are affecting the public transport sector. And it happens that UITP made a report last year called Public Transport Trends. So I will base myself on that presentation. We don't have 5 trends, we have 6 trends, but whatever. What I did is I didn't just take over the presentation as it standard is at UITP. I tried to put in a few, I skipped quite a few of the slides already, but I put in a few slides which are showing as well a little bit what's happening in this part of the world, and then I mean Southeast Asia. And as well, I noticed that my European colleagues who are behind the report still have a little bit of Eurocentric views, so I try to get those ones out as well. Let's go to the first trend. Again, the objective of the presentation is not to give you solutions, to give you clear-cut directions of where you have to bring your businesses to. But as I understood that the vast majority of you are true businessmen, I think you have to keep your eyes open all the time of where you're gonna invest in the near future. And as I understood from the CEO of your Chamber of Commerce this morning, Australia is having difficulties to have growth rates of 3%, same in Europe, by the way. And perhaps for your businesses, you want to wish slightly more. So perhaps you have to look beyond the borders of Australia or not. Demographic trends, what we see is there is a rapid urbanization, there is economic growth, which is moving to the southeast in your direction, in the direction of Australia. That's probably good news for you. Another trend we see is that there is a demotorization in industrialized countries. That means that there is the trend of buying more and more cars is not going higher anymore. So that's at least an observation in the European industrialized countries. Then there remains a need, and that's probably of interest of many of you, to look into new mobility models in the lower density areas as well. So these move to the southeast. If you look to the cities, the 500 largest cities around the world, you will see plenty of names that you never heard about, but that's actually where the real economic development is going to happen in the next coming decade. Now, I have added this slide. Having said that, you will see the motorization rate of Europe. That's what we just said. It's curbing, so the growth of cars isn't going up anymore. But having said that, if you look to the figure of a city like KL, Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, it's just rocketing in the last 10, 15, 20 years. Even worse, on top of that, so you have around, well, let's go back, you have around, plus 500 cars per 1,000 inhabitants. That's children included in everything in KL. And on top of that, you have still another, 360 motorbikes. So what's the future of public transport in this beautiful Southeast Asia? I'm afraid it's pretty troublesome. These are a few pictures of Ho Chi Minh and Jakarta. You see those poor buses being stuck in there. So as much as I would love to say that public transport has a bright future, I'm afraid it's not. Unless we could have this kind of situation that there is a free float for our bus. choosing the right solution depends on the political choice that you have. I mean, is it bus? Is it cars? Is it motorbikes? Frankly said, it's up to the politicians to decide ultimately what urban development that they want to have. And that's, I think, the role as an organization that we share as well with BIC that we have to take up. Then in the rural areas, I think that there is still 50% of the global population is living there, so we still need to provide good services in those areas as well. Michael already dropped the issue of Uber and their colleagues. I'm afraid, or happy, I don't know how you want, or it could be an opportunity, whatever you want to say about it, but it's clear, in my opinion, that in the coming 5 to 10 years, that model is going to affect the rural transportation and rural mobility heavily, and that as well all our businesses. So then the second axis of trends that we had identified is about the governing model and providing mobility in connected cities. We've seen a few presentations earlier about the integration that new technologies allows. We have the apps coming up, like the Ubers, but as well others, public transport related apps. We need to go to mobility platforms, and big data is, of course, the basis for smart cities. I'll jump this. Okay. Yeah. Beyond the, well, perhaps just one thing about that one, the increasing connectivity, the fact that everyone has smartphones really is a game changer. That allows people to know where, on an individual base, where everyone is, and allows as well the operators to provide individualized solutions. But it means as well that there is external stakeholders coming out into our market. We have mentioned Uber. Uber is not a traditional transport company. So there is other IT companies as well moving to transportation. So we have to look how to deal with these. Even though at UITP we believe that the actor that should be bring all this together in an integrated way must remain the public transport sector. It will remain, and it is. We should not be fooled by others. We will remain the center and the backbone of the transport system in the urban cities of tomorrow. But we must be prepared for that. So as you see, more and more other transport solutions are being used, and they take an important part in the total supply chain of transportation, in the total journey of individuals when they use our sector as well, our public transport services. It's not just door-to-door public transport anymore. It would be connected with other modes. It would be one day public transport, another day another mode of transport. Then, yeah, I added a few slides which, like when you see the green line on top, it's slides that I copied out of a presentation of our new president of UITP, Mr. Masaki Ogata from Japanese Railways. Japanese Railways is, as you might know, economically the biggest transport company in the world. They are, I think, around 150 in the Forbes top 500 of largest companies worldwide. So I presume he knows something, that guy. And he has made a presentation of how he wants to define the work of UITP in the coming, well, 2-3 years. And I took a few slides out of this presentation. It was not even discussed at UITP, so you just could have a look to that, and we can take that on for discussion eventually afterwards. Now, what he is saying on this big data is the reason of this slide is that it's not just about railways anymore. It's not just about buses anymore. It's about the client. It's about other services that we will have to use and integrate with our service portfolio as transport companies if we want to survive. Then the third is about the funding models of public transport. These business models are evolving. There is changes in the financing landscape. And we must make sure, again, to look beyond transport, to stop asking and begging for money as subsidies to our governments. We also must do our own homework. That is important, the subsidies in a lot of situations, but we must do our own homework and try to develop our services and gather the money from elsewhere. And the trends is that, I mean, in fairs, for example, they are becoming more and more complex. I remember, as a kind of anecdote, in the very first year of the financial crisis in Europe, the CEO of the Lisbon public transport operator very proudly saying to an audience of public transport experts, 80% of my customers think that my fares are not too expensive. And then I thought, well, I don't think that was very smart to say that, because you're in financial crisis and Portugal was hit quite hardly at that time. And here you have this guy very proudly saying that his fares are not too expensive. Well, if I am your minister, then I would think, hey, you can do a lot of cleanup with your fares to earn a lot of more money and to ask for a lot of less subsidies to me. And fact is that 1 year later, the guy wasn't in the position anymore. So we do have to do our own homework. There is no miracle solution, but at the fairs there is ways to have more flexibility and be more creative in that respect. Now, investments in infrastructure is another main challenge. The private sector probably has to take the lead because the government budgets are under pressure. And then as well, those who are beneficiaries from the transport sector, and then, I mean, the real estate developments, you know, about the transport-oriented developments, we have to try to get that money back into our sector as well. That's a slide. Professor Paul Barter had a similar slide on as this one, going from deregulation to fully public operations. I was quite interested that he went through the timeline from full deregulation to more and more control of the government, but he didn't mention that Singapore would go to a full public operations. So I don't know, Paul, whether you had any idea about that. Well, in this report, I must say that my colleagues wrote that there will be more room for private operators. To be very honest, I'm afraid that this might not be the case, unless we as sector organizations fight for having our piece of the cake. And I think it's absolutely fundamental, because the innovations and the dynamics from our business will come from private actors like you, like the business community. So another slide from our president, and again, that's just food for thought, where he says that from the moment when we fix smaller business domains, the business starts to decline. So from the moment their company has their main business in high-speed rail, transport business in high-speed rail, from the moment high-speed rail, heavy rail, and metro assume themselves to be in the rail business, we start to decline. Same for buses, light rail, and others. What does he mean with that? Is that if you focus on today in our business, if you focus and you say, well, I'm going to refocus on my core business, unfortunately, you see your numbers going down. So the message he said, he tried to spread, is that you have to look to opportunities outside the pure transportation business. And I personally believe it's very true, actually. What that means concretely in your own operations is possibly another, well, I don't have the answer necessarily of that. This is just a slide showing that the UK property value is much higher around the metro stations in London, Glasgow and Manchester. You know that story. Then the fourth trend is about the globalization. The sector is restructuring at the operator side. I'm sure, especially in Australia, you've seen that happening, but as well at the end of the supplying industry. You have as well quite a few new entrants in the sector, and several of them are not the traditional European players. You see Prasarana, the operator of Malaysia, operating in the Gulf region. They have 4 or 5 contracts in the Gulf region. They will operate the MRT in Indonesia. You have Shenzhen Metro from China, who has, I visited their building recently. It is the biggest transport building in the whole of China. Very impressive. And when I asked the CEO, well, why do you need this kind of building bigger than Shanghai and Beijing? He was telling me, well, we have been appointed as the international operator from China. So you will see them coming with their efficient and well-priced operations in the whole world. They have already contracts. They run light rail, for example, of Addis Abeba, and they have other contracts as well, and more will come. Same for DIMTS. DIMTS stands for the Delhi Integrated Metropolitan Transport System. Yeah, the Indians as well have a few contracts in the region and in Africa as well. And be sure that with their cost efficiency, they will start to operate in other places. Of course, we have the traditional MTR who operates in Australia, who operates in Europe as well. So the whole scene is changing. It's clear that our sector will face disruptive evolutions in the coming years. Again, I didn't promise you to have the answer. Probably the answer all depends on your own kind of businesses that you have locally. That same story for the supplying industry. There is a problem in our sector that the profitability of these companies is low. So again, probably pressured due to all kind of processes and so on. But the result of that is that there is not a huge dynamic coming from this type of an innovation coming from the supplying industry, unfortunately. Again, here, game changer is in China, the main rail supplier today is in size bigger than Siemens, Alstom, and Bombardier altogether. Similar things are happening, of course, in the bus sector. And I think in the bus sector, we will be faced to a real question of what will be the fuel and the technology of tomorrow. That's also something which is going to change in the next coming few years. And the whole scandal that happened with Volkswagen and, well, questioning again diesel is clearly something that will have its impact. Then the fifth is more traditional about the energy, climate change and air pollution that will remain having an impact on our business. Fuel prices have dropped quite dramatically. That's probably good for most of your businesses, but that's good as well for our competitors. My personal belief is that energy prices will in the future remain or even become a more important aspect of our operational cost. We can discuss that eventually later on. The problem of public transport is the more that we pollute, in a way, the better it is for the society. And that's a difficult message to get through, but that is a message that we must get through to politicians. The bigger our sector is, the less the overall pollution is. And that message is something, again, we have to work on together to make politicians understand that if they see emission growing from the transport sector, that actually that's a good thing, because it means that there is much less emissions from the private cars and from the motorbikes and whatever. Air pollution, I think people who live in Singapore are aware what it could do to the economy. We've been faced, though it was not linked to transportation, to quite some air pollution, and there has been a calculation by the Singaporean government that it has a huge impact on the economy of Singapore, and it's clear that this is also the case with other cities elsewhere. People are getting aware and not accepting that pollution levels anymore, and our sector is clearly a solution in that. And the sixth and last major trend is that everyone in the world is facing the problem to get good employees. And in the beginning, when we had that debate in the UITP, we thought, oh, that's only a problem at the well-developed cities. Singapore is facing a problem to attract good employees. I'm sure for finding good bus drivers, you also might have issues. It's a problem everywhere. But it's actually even a problem in the less developed countries where you could find easily drivers, but not good ones. So we will have to work on that. We will need to take personal care of our staff. We will need to make our staff proud of their job and make them aware that they have a very meaningful job, valuable for the society. Same for the less developed countries where we will have to help the systems to formalize and to get well-trained staff. Employer branding is one of the solutions that we could consider there, allowing the positioning of a company as a credible and attractive employer. And I think we all have to work together on that. So, yeah, that's the last slide from my new president, Omotenashi. I don't know if someone in the room knows what it is. Well, I didn't know either up till a few weeks ago, I must say. Omotenashi is actually getting the customer service, getting operational excellence to a next level, and that is bringing the service to your customer out of your heart. And I think that's a kind of message. I know it's an ideal world that comes from Japan, but that is something that we probably will have to do if we want to remain competitive. Our wealthier customer, the wealthier society in which we are operating, they are expecting that from us. And well, again, we can detail more eventually later on this one. So conclusion, public transport will need to change, but it's clear it will continue to have a very positive role in the sector. And as UITP, we are committed to work around that, those findings and share the knowledge across the world, but as well engage the politicians and decision makers to get aware of the different aspects and how they have to take the right decisions. And then there was Uber. I have still a few slides, but my time is over, so I will stop there. It were slides about, well, first this one, perhaps, you know, that next year we have the very big UITP Asia Pacific Congress and Exhibition taking place here in Singapore. That's where all the sector is gathering, but that's next year. So if you enjoyed this time, you come back next time. Thank you very much for, I will skip the slides, even though it's interesting. It's figures about Brisbane, where you see that the urban development, the urban density of Brisbane is dramatically too low to allow for public transport to have an efficient job, but that's for another time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tony. Good